Hi everybody, today we've got a digital piano shootout between two really fun synthesizer products from Roland. On my left, we're going to be looking at the Roland Juno DS88, and on my right, we're taking a look at the Roland FA-08. Now we have already done individual reviews for both of these, so this is a comparison video where we're going to be looking at what the critical differences are and which one might be best for you. We're going to be talking about what I think is the ideal customer for each one of these products. So thank you so much for joining us today. If it's the first time that you're visiting us here at Merriam Piano's YouTube channel, we would really appreciate if you did subscribe and hit that notification bell. We'd love to see you back commenting, watching, and participating in our ever-growing community of piano lovers. So without further ado, let's get started with the DS88 and the FA-08 right away. So we're in front of the Roland FA-08 and the Roland Juno DS88. These are two really super fun instruments. They've been out on the market quite a while. So as we said in the title, like, are these still relevant? Are they still great? And most importantly, how do they compare to each other? If you're looking at both and they're both kind of falling into your price range, obviously the FA-08 is, depending on your market, going to be sort of $700, $800, $900 more than the Juno DS88. So why would you spring for the one versus the other? What are the critical differences between the two? And of course, the overarching question, are they both relevant in 2020? Are they fun musical instruments that still have a place? Let's start with the similarities. So both of these instruments have fantastic actions. Now this is the G Feel Grand Action that I think made its debut in the Fantom G series, I believe. Somebody who's really up on the Roland history can correct me on that. But this was one of the best weighted actions that Roland had come out with right through until, you know, the mid-2000 teens. Roland now primarily uses in their portable products of all kinds two actions, the PHA4, the PHA50. This doesn't use either one of them, but it feels a lot closer to the PHA50 than it does to the PHA4, in my opinion. It's a nice, smooth, key action from top to bottom. The repetition speed is good, but it does feel a little more substantial than the current PHA4. So, you know, thumbs up for the action. Some of the other similarities, they both have a really great selection of onboard sounds. The quality of the sounds on the Roland Fantom is going to be a little bit higher because there are supernatural sound engines that are kind of tucked inside, whereas the Juno does not. So if you're somebody who needs really a professional level of detail in their sounds and the ability to edit those sounds, the FA-08 is definitely going to be your machine, whereas the Juno is not. Another thing that they both have is the ability to set up live presets, such as splits and multi-layered functions. So for people who are thinking about this as a gigging instrument, they both do that. However, you're limited to basically two different sounds at once over on the Juno, whereas on the FA-08 you could conceivably, although why would you ever do this, but conceivably get up to 16 parts at once happening as a live patch. And I suppose if you really split the keyboard up into 2 or 3 different sections and that set velocity layers, like, I could see a few situations where you might actually wind up doing this. So there are there's a few of the similar types of functionality that you're getting on both of these keyboards. So for live solo line playing, both going to be great. For basic live performance, just generally speaking, both certainly could do the trick. But now we get to the point where we get functionalities that diverge greatly between these two. So first thing, we're going to talk about the control surfaces. Both of these have customizable, programmable control surfaces that work both to create custom sets of controls for what you would call in this one your performance or your perform patches. On this one you would call it studio set. They're kind of the same concept. This has 4 assignable knobs, whereas the FA series has 6 assignable knobs. And you've got more functionality that gets applied to the knobs on the FA-08 versus the Juno DS. You've got the 4 faders on the DS, which I actually really like on a stage piano. If I was to critique the FA-08 in one area, it would be that I really would love to have some of those faders. Roland has put it on the RD2000. I think it's one of the best features they have on the 2000, especially for live performers. I think it's, anyway, I would always love things to have tactile, really easy to see control like that. So the FA-08 doesn't have that, DS does, but again, it's sort of limited to just your line in and then just a maximum of 2 simultaneous patches at one time. And I'll just quickly demonstrate what's going on with that. So when you're on the DS, you have really kind of 2 setup environments. You've got patch, which allows you to just play one sound at a time, and then you've got perform, which allows you to save a number of combinations of features into sort of a performance preset mode. So if we're on just a patch, you've got your just single mode to play one sound or one patch at once. And there's some really great quality But then you've got this other mode which lets you do splits and dual mode. So a split obviously is one sound on the bottom, one sound on the top. Dual is where you've got 2 sounds that occupy the entire range. So something like this, which is a dual. So you're hearing piano and strings at the same time. But then you've got split, which is where you're going to have piano up top, and in this case, we've got strings down below. We'll just knock that up by an octave. And you can set the split point. On the FA-08, you've got exactly the same functionality. And you've even got the similar language, which is nice. So it's calling it split mode and dual mode. And the only critical difference here is instead of switching back and forth between a patch mode and a performance mode, you basically just have like a 1-part mode on studio set. And then to get into your full studio set, which gives you the ability to control up to 16 sounds at once. And this is completely integrated with its sequencer engine. That's the main difference between this one and that one. So you go from 2 to up to 16. So I've already said at the beginning, if you're a live musician and if you are going to need, or you already know there's situations where you would need 4, 5, 6 layers, 2 or 3 layers with some sort of a split, or maybe you just want to be using this as your sound source and have like a second keyboard just as a MIDI input, this is what you are going to need. Very limited on the Juno. If you need those really expansive sounds and options all in a single setup, FA-08 gives you the full 16, which is typical of most top-level workstations. So that's really cool. When it comes to selection of sound, you've got virtually the same types of categories, which is to be expected. But like I mentioned, you've got the absence of supernatural and you have the presence of supernatural over here. And so the supernatural engines that Roland produces really gives users the ability to get into certain types of sounds and edit at a much more granular level, but it also just produces a more complex, thick tone overall. So I'll give you one of the best examples we could use, because of course this is a piano-focused channel, is just to play the default piano sound. So there's your default piano sound, non-supernatural piano. And if we go into here, and we're going to get out of this mode, and we're just going to go back to full grand piano. It's not exactly full grand piano. One moment. Now we're into a supernatural piano. So I'm hearing a pretty big difference, actually. Oh yeah. Here's a good example of the difference in the sound engines that we're dealing with between these two. So beyond the piano sounds and beyond the organ sounds, we were just listening to that, they've got an orchestra section, they've got a world instrument section, brass, vocal, and pad, synth, and a sample section. So still a really, really impressive number of tones that you've got on the Juno to play around with. When it comes to this, it's just more of the same. So you've got keyboards and organs, you've got bass and synth bass, but again, everything is just a little more realistic and a little more detailed, or in some cases, a lot more detailed. Brass. Vocal, choir, synth pad, FX, and all sorts of other things. So you can get into the specific lists of tones and compare them back and forth, but no matter what you're comparing, that's generally what you're going to find between these two, is a totally usable, totally respectable set of sounds over here that would be very appropriate for most live settings. Starts to not cut it when you get into like a professional recording context, but definitely great for playing around live, no problem. Whereas over on the FA-08, you're dealing with sounds which completely make the professional grade, both in terms of a recording sound source as well as obviously live use. Let's get into the colored buttons, because even though you would think that these two, because they have 8 and then over here we've got 16, I was like, oh, okay, they've just doubled it up, but it's basically the same function. Actually, not really, which can be a little bit confusing when you're comparing these two instruments. So the Juno DS has a basic sequence function in there, and they call this the pattern sequencer. And it's not a full non-linear 16-track editing type sequencer like you get on the FA-08. It's essentially like a loop sequencer, which is great for sketching out ideas for songs and things like that. So you can set the loop length to 1 bar, 2 bar, 4 bars, or 8, and then play up to 8 phrases that you can then turn on and off with the mute function and really kind of just construct a texture. So this can be really easy and fun to play play around with. Because the Juno's battery operated, you could set a headphones, take off to a park, a friend's house, on a vacation, and just sit there and come up with a lot of really interesting textures on a low-cost instrument. But that's about as far as it's going to get. You're never going to be able to build a full song inside the Juno. That's not really its purpose. When we come over to the FA-08, that's where we get into the full workstation style sequencer. And this is where you could build, conceivably, an entire backing track to a song that you were writing. Whether or not you ultimately wind up keeping all of those sounds for the full release of a track would be an artistic decision, but you'd have the MIDI information at least that you could put into a DAW and have even higher quality plugins then render that after the fact. But this is probably the biggest difference between these two. And it's the sequence functionality. So over here, we've really got limited up to 8-bar looping phrase sequencer. Let's call it that. Over here, we've got a full sequencer, but that is actually not what the sample pad or the pads are used for over here. On the FA-08, the pads are used for a couple of functions. You can get in there to the pad utility and set the different functionality or the modes that you can use these pads on. And it goes from everything from being able to use this as a numeric, like an entry pad, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But you can also use it to mute and unmute tracks within your sequencer. And it works as a really high quality sampler. And you've got 4 banks times 16 of sampling at your disposal. And you can sample both with inbound sound through the line in, but you can also sample certain phrases that you might want to play just on the instrument itself, because just the functionality of a sampler might be something that you want to use. Rather than having to, program everything in. So if you have a phrase that you really want to just have some fun with, you can record that as a sample and then cue that up just as a single button. It's just a different workflow to achieve the same thing that you could. Now, within the sequencer, it also has a loop function. So that thing that we were just talking about, the ability to quickly just lay down a few 8-bar phrases, and I'll actually do that just so that we can sort of get just a super quick sense of what that looks like. So let's do pattern length of 8, and I should mention that we have done a full review of the DS where I get into detail on how to do this. So don't worry if you're missing what I'm doing here. This is really just a comparison of the functionality between the two. So we've got a wait note on, and we are going to record. So I didn't have to press anything, it just automatically gets into loop mode as soon as I'm done that. And I'm going to move over to this, and let's just lay down a bass. Here we go. And finally, I'm just going to manually do a quick drum thing here. So that's actually really very close to about sort of the limit of what you're able to do on the DS. We could add up to 8, and then we could certainly export that and have a lot of fun and you know, create multiples of those. So like I said, it's a really good fun way to sketch out song concepts. You could also have a few of those loops ready for some sort of a live show, but that's about it. When we get over to the FA-08, now we're dealing with that full 16-track sequencer, which we've mentioned a couple of times. And that's where we can do all sorts of fun stuff. Wow, listen to the difference in that sound. It's pretty actually remarkable. So, count in, measure. We're not going to have the loop on, but we could if we wanted to, and we could set the loop length to anything we wanted, not just 8 bars. We could do 16 bars, 32 bars. So very important lesson, do not start recording over another sequence that you already have loaded in there, like I just did. So, song select, we're going to go down into an empty song. Now we don't have anything. This is going to go a little bit better. And we've got it on loop mode. And again, let's get the bass in here. Now, when I'm in record mode on this, the cool thing is I don't even have to stop recording. I just go to the next track and it's still just in record mode. So I can continue to just layer this up in a really free-flowing, creative way. Now at any time I can also turn this loop off. And so if I turn the loop off, I can record a section in loop mode to get something happening, and then once I've finished recording that section, I can turn the loop off and move on to a different section. So it's almost like you can do these little phrases or verses or you know, chunks of a tune. Use the looping function, which a lot of people love, to sort of layer up and really experiment with the texture, and then you sort of finish it off and you glue it together with another one of these sections, and you can string this all along to create this full, you know, full texture. So I love the fact that it's so easy to use loop mode in the FA-08. For me, I mean, there's a lot about the instrument, so people are going to have different parts of it that they really like, but to me, the ease at which the loop can be used in a record sequence to string sections together is one of my favorite things about this track. The last comparison I'm going to draw between these two is the connectivity, the ports that are on the back. So on the Juno, we've got two 1/4-inch outs. Those are your stereo left and right outs that goes to any kind of a conventional PA or an amplifier. You've got a headphone jack, and then you've got one 1/4-inch mic jack in, which is really, this has a fun vocoder function on it, which is pretty interesting to use. Over here, we've got two 1/4-inch outs, the headphone jack. You've got a sub out, which you can assign a particular track. So people would use that if they wanted to be running, say, a click track to a mix that only the band could hear rather than the main out. That's one of the functionalities that they would use for something like that. And then you've got two input lines as well, which you can switch between line level and mic level. So you can have like a guitar or an instrument line in or a mic in. And then you've got MIDI in and out, USB in and out, and then your pedal controls. So fairly similar in terms of the connectivity on these two instruments. So let's kind of summarize really what the main critical differences are here between these two. We've got great sound selection, but a difference in sound quality. You've got the Supernatural engine here really providing just a thicker, lusher tone than what you've got on the Juno DS. You've got a sort of a partial sequencer, this phrase pad sequencer on the Juno DS, where you've got full 16-track sequencing options over here with a loop record option, which, as I mentioned, is one of my favorite options of that sequencer. You've got real-time controls on both, which are assignable, so you can use this as a DAW control to control other software, or just to assign it to different parameters on the setups that you're dealing with. And of course, the ability to save everything that we're talking about as presets, well, not in an unlimited way, but you've got hundreds of slots to be able to do this. So every single thing that we're talking about, you always have the ability to, to make sure that's saved on the local machines. You can recall it at any time for live performance. In my view, the Juno DS works really well for people who are looking for a casual, portable, creative tool to take along with them. Somebody who just needs a kind of basic synth functionality at live gigs, but more or less just uses this for its piano or e-piano functionality. Or people who are just starting to get into music production and are looking for an inexpensive controller that also can act as a sound source. I think this would work really well. The FA-08, very different beast. This is a full workstation for people who are either doing fairly complex live gig setups or people who are fully immersed in music production and just really appreciate having the tactile connection with a workstation sequencer versus dealing exclusively with software throughout the creative process. Sequencers like this are also a lot more stable and preferred in a lot of live gig settings, because if you are playing to track, there are, I know, many music directors who prefer to have those sequences being played off an instrument like this, which is not prone to crashing, not prone to bugginess. It's a closed proprietary system, and so you can almost be assured of never running into some sort of a glitch in the sequence. So if you want more in-depth information on either one of these, we've done separate reviews of both, but we hope that you found this comparison to be really helpful. I certainly had a lot of fun learning about these instruments. This is a world that I used to spend a lot of time in, so it's kind of fun to get back into it. And answering the very first question that I asked in the video, and answering one of the very first questions that I asked in the video, are these relevant in 2020? Well, I would unequivocally say yes. Neither one of these feel outdated to me. I think as we move forward in time, music gear is just becoming more specialized and more specific to each need. What I like about the FA-08 is just how general use this really could be for a wide range of musicians. And I love the fact that the Juno gets the price point down enough that this becomes fun and accessible for people who are maybe a little more on the amateur, or let's call it prosumer side of things. So thank you so much for watching. Please let us know what you thought of the video and the comparison. We try our very best to respond to as many comments as we possibly can. This has been the Merriam Pianos YouTube channel. We hope to see you back for more views, more comments in the future. Take care and have yourselves a great day.